Greetings, everyone. This video is to introduce you to Project 2 and hopefully lay out about 3 hours of work where you may engage with this project at the beginning so that you can spend your time wisely as we get started on Project 2. So the first thing you want to do is to review the documents for Project 2. Now, these documents have been updated. So I'm going to go to course documents, scroll down to Project 2, and you should see an additional set of documents. So there are 4 documents here. You should see 4 documents instead of just 1. The first document is the assignment sheet. And then the second document is an overview of the assignment sheet and the choices that you have in order to get this analysis essay completed. And then there's the peer review sheet and then an example of the rubric. So the first thing I want to bring your attention to is there's this task called the Information Literacy Toolkit that all students in EN 101 have to complete. So you have the option of completing this task with either Project 2 or Project 3. The reason you have a choice is in the past, I have paired it only with Project 3, and some students have voiced their opinion that they would have liked to have completed that with Project 2 so that they could have practiced some of these research skills before they got to Project 3. And so I'm remedying that effect by allowing you to choose. So it is up to you. And I will talk about the Information Literacy Toolkit after I go over this particular assignment, which is an analysis essay that you're writing. So if you haven't already, download all of these documents and you're going to want to read them. Some people may want to print them out and annotate them. And then you want to ask questions about the documents, which is the same thing as asking questions about the assignment in general. But in order to ask those questions, I first ask you to review these first 2 documents. So take some time, open them, read them, jot down some notes. And then in those notes, you may have some initial questions. The second thing I'm going to ask you to do is to go ahead and make sure you can access the Abrams chapter that we're using for this task. So in section 2 of the Abrams book, which is available online, we are using chapters 4, 5, and 6. So this isn't your first time using the Abrams text. So you know you're going to be asked to talk about a combination of the techniques and the activities and post on Blackboard to demonstrate that you read the chapter. Please read the entire chapters. Don't just read the techniques you're interested in. And also, I strongly suggest that you complete more techniques than you do activities. So you have to complete a total of 4 things. I just suggest you focus more on the techniques, because if you focus more on the activities are a way to help you practice one or more of those techniques. So just keep that in mind. And you're also asked to use the examples in the chapters for your models for what you're doing. And you're using those as far as page length, but also how the writers are using the techniques that you're expected to use to create your analysis essay. And then, you're posting in the discussion board. That's our way of preparing to talk about the techniques. And then you can post questions at any time. So what I like for you to do at this moment is to pause this video and take anywhere between a half an hour and 45 minutes to look and read and take notes on the assignment sheet itself, and also the assignment overview. Now, this has been updated since I posted. This third item I'm going to ask you to look at is this video. So this video is from a previous semester, and I think it's still helpful. But the detailed document overview you'll see in the video has been updated. So you're using this document here. So what I'm asking you to do is to pause this video, take the next half hour to 45 minutes to review these two documents, look at the video, and also preview chapters 4, 5, and 6. So how I like you to do that preview is as follows. Open the Abrams text. If you haven't already bookmarked the website for the online version of the text, I strongly suggest you do that. I'm going to scroll up here because this is the direct link to our online text. So I'm going to go to the read online version. So what I like for you to do in this half hour to 45 minutes when I say preview the chapters. So I'm just going to go and open this online, go to the table of contents. We're in part 2 of the text. And so what I like for you to do as a preview is to definitely read the section introduction. Read it, take some notes. That's the same as annotating. Annotating is when you write directly on the document, but taking notes is a form of annotation too. So read the introduction, and then for each of the chapters we're using for this analysis task, read at least the introduction to the chapter. So that's what I'm asking you to do as part of this preview. So the introduction, there's some information, and then you'll see vocabulary, and then you'll get to the techniques. So I'm saying stop right before the techniques. And if you do this, if you take this time for each of these chapters, read the introduction and read the introductory information for each chapter, stopping right before the techniques, then you'll have a better sense for what kinds of questions you might ask about project 2. So quick recap. I'm asking you to pause this video, read through the assignment sheet, this overview, look at this video from a previous semester and preview chapters 4, 5, and 6, and then start the video again. Okay, so now that you spent that time trying to understand the assignment, if you have questions, this will be a really good time to post them in the discussion board area. Also, it'd be a good time to check your schedule, see if you have time to make office hours to ask questions as early as you can about the project. So you are not waiting until it's time for the peer review or the draft to be due. So for that, I say now, take another 15 minutes or so and ask questions about the document. Not just questions, but also you can post things that you think you understand. So I really don't just need questions. I need any information that shows that you get it. So you can use the virtual office to do that, right? So let's take a look. So some of the questions I get at this point is usually about what kinds of text can you use for this project. And I've already listed them in this assignment overview and choices, and I pretty much stick to that. The reason I don't want you going out and picking anything is because I have to grade this thing and evaluate it. And the easier access I have to the document that you are doing analysis of, the easier I can get that done. So hopefully that answers one of those questions. But again, this would be a time to go to the virtual office or use office hours. I'm just going to click on the virtual office here. And this is where you can post, right, project 2 comments, questions, points of understanding. Just go and populate that area or use office hours to ask those questions. All right, so from this point, I want to go back to some of the other tools that you may use for completing this task. This is where the anchor texts are going to come in. So you had some anchor, that means, grounding text that we're going to use throughout the course of the semester. So I posted this reminder to use your anchor text. And there are, I think all the anchor texts can be useful. Specifically, I'm pointing out some from the Jackson text and some from Writing Spaces. So again, you should use them as like your foundation, but I'm suggesting these specifically. So if you haven't already read Navigating Genres by Carrie Dirk, you might want to go ahead and check that out. We're moving away from more personal writing from the first project and moving into this sort of space of academic writing. So that's why I suggest taking a look at Irving's essay. But probably the most important one, if you haven't read, is How to Read Like a Writer, because this reading pairs really well with the Jackson's Reading Mindfully, and also for what you're going to have to do in order to write analytically. And chapter 4 and chapter 6 really talk about how analytical writing works. So I really suggest that you refer to the anchor text throughout this period as you're working on this document. So at this point, I want to take a pause in the video and talk a little bit about each of the chapters from Abrams that you're going to be using. So my overview of chapter 4. Now, I'm going to say chapter 4 is probably the main chapter for the content that you need for understanding interpretation, analysis, and close reading, and how these three things work together. So you are doing an analysis, you're taking something apart to explain its meaning or how it works. And to do that, you have to make a reasonable interpretation about what the document means to a particular audience or a subject. What is it trying to communicate? And so for that, that requires some close reading and thinking about the world around you, not only just what you think, but you're putting this interpretation based on looking at parts of a piece and explaining what's happening to a bigger audience. So you just can't say whatever. It's not just what my opinion. It has to have some logic and some sense to it. So you need to have a specific approach. And the purpose for why you're doing this. So the purpose can, there are a number of reasons why people do analysis. Mainly, we like to understand something. But you have to decide what your purpose is going to be for the document that you've selected. And by document, I'm using that term loosely. It could be film, it could be a written piece. So document is being used as a large category here. But you also have to consider your life and very specific things. And this is why the mindful and critical reading is important. So your life experiences and the kinds of assumptions that we bring, our personal understanding. So our background is made up of our cultural understanding. So culture, I would suggest looking up these words and writing down basic definitions for them. So cultural, loosely, my values, my beliefs, my traditions. So you can get a handle of what you are bringing to the interpretation. Your educational background, geographical location, how your family, how you understand familiar structures, your ways of thinking about the world. So ideological perspectives, and then personal experiences. So our lived experiences, who we are, is made up of a bunch of these things. So when we are saying we're going to analyze something or we're going to interpret, who we are in all these various aspects has some influence on what we end up doing. This is not objective. Nowhere in this semester am I ever going to ask you to pretend to be objective, because I think full objectiveness is not possible because we're human beings. So we are influenced by the world around us. So in this first chapter, when we talk about this section on interpretation, I strongly suggest when you read through to summarize this And I suggest a reading technique where each paragraph or each section of paragraph, you write down one or two sentences what that section is about by summarizing it. And then you also write your understanding, like your reflective, like what does this mean for you as a writer? So I suggest you do that as to help you start to practice close reading. And then the section on analysis, like how we understand something, some larger picture by looking at parts of it and figuring out how those parts work. But what I want to get to in this chapter, again, please read the entire chapter. As you know, I do not quiz you on any vocabulary from the chapter, but the vocabulary is important to help you understand the tools that you have as a reader and a writer. The sections that I focus most on is this idea of lens and motif, pattern, reference, and symbol. So I want to talk about this lens a little bit and the definition, and I'm just going to scroll to the point in this chapter where they talk about these socio-cultural lenses. Now, where is that? Did I pass it? Yeah. So most of the examples that I gave in the document of what you can choose from, I updated and let you choose any film or episode that is available on Hulu or Netflix because I have access to that. But I've updated that from saying specifically what kinds of films that you could choose from. And I did that because I know that I have this sort of bent in my lens. Like I like to understand social cultural things. So the films I selected for previous semester had like a bend towards using these types of lenses. But I think this is a really good way of approaching an analysis, and they give you some examples of you can analyze your document from a specific perspective. So understanding these different social cultural lenses actually goes back to way at the beginning in our interpretation part of the chapter where it says you need to understand some of this stuff about who you are. So I just want to say that, yes, I lean towards analyzing things from this social cultural perspective. And you get a lot of choice in those kind of perspectives. But depending on the type of document you're doing analysis of, it may not lend itself to a social cultural interpretation or analysis. So you have to be aware of that. So you may need to look at some of these other techniques depending on what kind of document you're looking at. They're all going to require you to pay attention, what they call here radical noticing. So if you're going to do an analysis of, say, someone else's essay, you may be looking more at that writer's choices of like rhetorical devices or specific writing techniques and how the techniques help them reach their audience. So you may not be doing oh, this is what it means for the world around us. So those are like my specific things that I just wanted to highlight from this chapter. As I'm scrolling through, people always ask, can they do this personal photo essay as the assignment? No, you cannot. You can do this activity. It helps you practice a lot of analysis techniques, but you cannot do that that's not one of the options. So I just want to answer that question already. These are really good activities for helping you do shorter types of analysis. So the analysis that you're doing is expected to be a little more engaged and a bit longer than, an advertisement or looking at some doing a photo analysis. So these practices are miniature versions. And I do want to point out that while the poem explication is nice, you will not have the opportunity to do this as one of your analysis. And so I also want to point out that the example or the model text in this chapter 4, are not going to be the most useful for you. The probably the best thing about this example is it shows you what annotating looks like. So if you are doing a written document, it would be best to have something printed out so you can write directly on it. But do not rely on the models in chapter 4. So that's my little spiel on chapter 4. So I'm going to say pause this video and go do some reading, ask some more questions, come back to the video, and I'll be talking about chapter 5. Okay, so I want to say a couple things about chapter 5. Not a lot, because you've already been working on how to summarize. You've been working on the annotated bibliography task, or even the reflective responses you post. They require you to condense information to main points. And so the expectation is people already to a certain extent know how to summarize. Now we're working on how do you use those summary techniques for different writing needs. So in chapter 5, there's talking about how to use summary and response when you're engaged in analytical kinds of writing. So I just want to point out, this is probably this is the first time in our class that we're talking directly about how to use quoting choices: direct, paraphrase, and summary quotes. We'll talk about that again later, but why it's important here is because these are skills you use in different writing situations. So using them in this particular type of essay is important because often you will be analyzing something that your reader may not be familiar with. So you really need a strong sense of how summary works so that you can get to key points and get beyond summary to the analysis and to the interpretation. And so for that, I want to say, if a summary is something that you feel you struggle with, you may want to do more of the activities in here just to practice, and definitely read through the techniques, this one here, about basically how reading helps us pinpoint those main points. So this is again where close reading and the chapter from Jackson on reading mindfully and how to read like a writer are important, because you're not reading to tell someone what's going on. You're reading to understand how the writer is doing something. So this is more of a how, not a what. And if you say what the writer is doing, you need to be able to explain that if you just stuck in what. But I did say for chapter 4, do not rely on the model text. But for chapter 5, do rely on the model text. And I'm just scrolling through here. I'm not scrolling through because I don't want you to pay attention to this. I think this section on paraphrase, summary, and direct quotes is helpful. Even if you feel 100% you know what you're doing, it's very helpful, because if you've already, and you should have done some summary already, at least for the Jackson text, after you look at these pointers, you can go back and see what you did so far for the Jackson text, but you have more summaries for your annotations to go. So the idea is that I ask you to write summaries, right, already. And then we have some information in our text about how to do that, and some activities like looking at these examples and the differences between quoting, paraphrase, and summary. In hopes that you're going to get better. So the annotations that you have yet to write will be improved because you've done this analysis paper and you've done this reading that looks at the different ways that quoting, paraphrase, and summary work, what they look like, and what they should be doing for you as a writer. But I do want to scroll down to the model text in chapter 5 because I like these model texts. So all of these model texts are useful. And I suggest you pick at least one, maybe two. And it depends because, you know, if you're doing something like a written text, so this model text is about someone writing about someone else's story. So this is an analysis based on a written text. But I'm going to scroll down, and I just want to point something out about this text. So this student model. So this student has two-sided sources because the student didn't just, let me put it this way. The student is doing analysis of Benjamin's piece. But in Benjamin's piece, the analysis is of this short story. And in order for this writer to do this justice, the writer had to read the short story. And so the writer has more than one source. So this is a paper that you may have to have outside sources for, because we're not just advancing what we think. If we think an episode from The Office is really about the wage gap, you know, between men and women, I may have to, I just can't say that. I got to go find something to support it. So I will have to bring some additional support to some of my interpretation. So while these examples you'll see may only have one cited source, that's not necessarily the case. So I think all of these examples in chapter 5 are useful. I want to go specifically to this last one? Yeah. So, and also just point out how the length differences between this last one, you snooze, you peruse, and the other ones in chapter 5, because what the teacher takeaway is, and this is one thing that I am concerned with, is that when you get engaged with this, that people would get stuck at the summary phase, at the summarizing level, or they will set their response or their paper, because this is an essay, it's not just a response. They will set their paper up in this sort of, I'm going to summarize the whole entire thing. That's my first paragraph or two. And then the second paragraph or two, if there's that many, will be my response to the whole thing. And then I'll have a conclusion. So this essay is a good example for what this student still needs to work on, is integrating summary, analysis, and interpretation. So please take a second and read through the advice from this instructor. Is you want to be able to integrate, even not just paragraph by paragraph, but sometimes within a paragraph and at sentence level. But here's another example of the student, and this is the other thing, like this is so short and condensed, even though the student has used more than one source. So my 2 cents on chapter 5 really is, looking at the examples and not getting stuck at summarizing, because analysis is more than summarizing. All right, you can pause the video here. Maybe you want to do some reading, maybe you want to post some more questions, but I will come back and talk about a bit about chapter 6. Okay, so here we are in chapter 6, and I'm starting at the model text for giving you my highlights about what stands out in this chapter for me and what I think is helpful. So I did say you could use the model text in chapter 5. They are a bit more developed, especially the one that's undeveloped, the one that the student sort of gets stuck at summary. What was that one? I just want to make sure I get the name of, that one is a really good model. I would call it like a draft. It's something you want to get past. It's the you snooze, you peruse essay. But chapter 6, the essays in chapter 6 are the best model text because they have taken the techniques from the previous chapters in addition to chapter 6 to create probably the best example of what you're trying to turn out. And so when you're thinking about what text you want to do an analysis of, it needs to be a text that has some level of complexity. Can't be something simple. So it needs some level of complexity that you have to dig into, and so that you can get the level of interpretation and some meaning. And it should be something that you care to analyze, you want to understand. Okay, so I started the model text. So chapter 6 gives the better examples. I will scroll down. There is something, let's see. Yep. So actually all of these examples, model texts, are probably the better ones to use, but you don't want to just skip to them. You want to move through the other 2 chapters, 4 and 5, before you come here. So again, I will say, while the analysis of the poem is helpful, and some of you may want to read that one since you are not able to do that type of genre for this assignment, it may not be worth your time. So I just want to point that out. But what you want to be able to do with any one of these examples here is to go through and read them for the techniques that you have been exposed to in chapter 4 and 5 and 6. So you want to be able to try to figure out what kind of analysis does, say, the song's essay use, and that's from chapter 4. So we have different types of analytical approaches. Try to figure out, what do you think is going on here? And then how are they using, right? How are they using the source? How are they using paraphrase, summary, and direct quotes along with their interpretation, what they mean, and how are they explaining the overall purpose? Now, the overall purpose. In this task, you're asked to have a very clear thesis statement. And that's what chapter 6 really gets us to. I'm going to scroll all the way up to the top here. So beyond summary, so analysis and synthesis, we use summary as a technique to help us analyze and to help us synthesize. Synthesize is when you bring different ideas together to create a more unique interpretation of it. It brings different things together and it becomes something new. So that is the goal of, being able to have an analysis that's about something. So how does this episode from The Office really tell us about male, female roles in contemporary society? The synthesis is going to be the part that actually achieves that answer for us. So it's not a quick fix, easy thing to do. And so at the beginning of this chapter, I would say spend a little time with both of these models here. So we are moving towards, from just, I can take something apart, I can summarize it, to a more complex understanding. And that understanding is what you're helping your readers get. So either one of these models, they're useful, but as you see, once we are getting towards the more complex, you're coming up with something new. And that is what synthesis helps us do, come up with something different, a different understanding. And it should be reasonable that people can like, okay, I can follow how you got here or how you're supporting that point. The other thing in this chapter is to think about the thesis statement. So in the first project, we didn't have a thesis statement. We're telling a story. It was more implied. You had to read the whole thing to understand what's going on. But for the next 2 projects, this one and project 3, you are asked to have a very clear thesis. And that is not something you get automatically. You have to work at it. So I want to scroll down to the questions. So in this chapter, you get introduced to asking questions. And for me, those questions do also come from thinking through the ways that you can use the analytical tools introduced in chapter 4. So asking questions. I just want to scroll down to, where is it? My research question. Okay, it's here somewhere. Oh, there it is. Research question and embedded thesis. So asking questions that are of an analytical nature, like how does this work? How does it connect to something else? So being able to look at the document and using a specific sort of analytical approach, back to chapter 4, what kinds of research questions can you come up with for the piece you're analyzing? So what questions can you ask? And this is where the information literacy toolkit task comes in. So again, you may want to do that task with project 2. You can decide to do it with project 3, but every student is expected to do that task. And since the information literacy toolkit does help you think about a topic, generating ideas around it, and asking research questions, one of the reasons that you might want to do it with this. But you're going to need some thesis statement, but the thesis and the type of thesis that you use will depend on the kinds of questions that you ask. So I want to go up to the T techniques. Oh yeah, so starting with asking, just doing an observation of whatever is the document you decided to do an analysis of. The observation part is to think, going and doing a close read of it. What is it about? So, and asking the so what, and taking what your close reading tells you about it to ask some questions. Okay, so observation. What does this text say? What have you noticed about it? This goes for if it's a written text or if it's a film. And then what do I have to say about this text? And this is where we start to get into questions that may help you develop a thesis. But we start with the point of questioning. And look, they mentioned my fave, Purdue OWL here, and some examples, but I want to go down to, they give us 2 specific strategies that you may not have thought of or used before, or maybe you have used and you didn't know they had a name. So the T3 strategy, a lot of people like, I like, because it gives you a claim. And then it also says 3 things that you're going to address about that specific claim. And this is good because that means these are 3 things you found or you observed in the text that you want to explain and take apart. And then there is the occasion position thesis strategy. Now this one is a little more challenging, and I also think it also may lend itself better if you're doing a social cultural approach, again chapter 4. But my takeaway from chapter 6 is going to be, this is the tool, this is the chapter where you can use to help you move beyond summary into analysis and synthesizing information, asking good questions that will help you create a thesis statement. Yeah. And the model text in this chapter, I suggest you read them, pick one, read them like a writer, and see how many of the techniques from the 3 chapters you can see going on in the model that you have selected. So that is my spiel for chapter 6. So hopefully this overview has given you at least 3 hours of work to think about as you start this project and as you move through, and you can ask some questions and yeah, make decisions about if you're going to do the information literacy toolkit task. And I'm thinking, yeah, so that's it. Hopefully this helps you get started on this task.